Welcome to session 22 of Classic Metal Class. Scott and I are very excited to be restarting this series, and we're glad we got some old hands here who
Yeah.
not only, have been great with feedback and comments throughout the years, but also really know music well. So I think we're going to have a very interesting session. Um, the topic that we're looking at this time is one that we've talked about in general in the past, but we're going to get a bit more specific. So it's, what do bands owe their fans and audiences? So we're talking about essentially an ethical question. And the question that we really wanted to approach was spurred by some remarks of Dee Snider a couple months back. What do bands owe their fans and audiences in terms of set lists for live performances, in terms of the songs that they choose to have in those? And Scott's got a lot of views on that, and I've got a lot of views, and I'm willing to bet that all of you have quite a few views as well. For anybody who's not tuning in live and is watching this later, we should do some introductions. So Scott, why don't you do a brief bio of yourself, then I'll chime in as well.
So I'm Scott Cerulli, and I've been a professional musician for about 30 years. And my roots, the reason Greg and I hit it off so well is we're both metalheads. And even though I don't really play a lot of metal anymore, that's where I started, and I still listen to it all the time. So I was studying with Greg with philosophy, and we came up with this idea that we can combine both of our knowledge to come up with some of these great topics. So, and I teach at Berklee College of Music also for a while. So I see a lot of the different trends
Mm.
and all this different kind of the new, what the new generation is aware of, what they're not. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much all I do.
Yeah, so I'm Greg Sadler. This is airing in my channel, so I'm assuming everybody knows who I am, but they might not know that I have, an abiding interest in metal. Scott and I are metalheads from childhood onward, and we were lucky enough, as are some of our guests here today as well, to have come up during the classic 70s, 80s, going bleeding over into the early 90s, when then metal started getting displaced by other genres for a while, but now it's back. And so we're going to kick off by looking at something that Dee Snider said in a Blabbermouth article back in September, and it was about Metallica's no repeat weekend concept. So Metallica, of course, huge band, they can do anything that they want to. They're kind of fortunate in that respect. And Dee Snider is somebody who often will weigh in with controversial takes. So he's asked about this idea of a no repeat weekend. And the no repeat weekend means that Metallica would play 2 shows in each city, and the first show would have a totally different set list than the second show. So it's sort of like a double LP, right? When we had these records that we could buy, and there were 2 records in the thing, and they're not going to put the same songs on each. And Dee Snider says, I wasn't aware they were doing that, and credit to them, but I think it's kind of self-serving. And it really only appeals to a small percentage of the crowd. The majority of the people going to these shows, and not just people who are going to see Metallica, this also applies to bands like Kiss and Twisted Sister, they're there for the hits. The percentage of people who know the deeper cuts and are willing to accept not hearing Enter Sandman one night, that's a very small bunch of people. So that's the catalyst, right? And we're going to look at that argument that basically you're there to cater to the broad swath of people that are attending the show, and your long-standing fans are probably just a small percentage of that. And then he said, when Twisted Sister first reunited, it was for that New York Steel show in 2001 Eddie Trunk put on, and the other guys made the set list, and they wanted to put on some deep cuts. They put on some stuff from the bar days in there, and it was the first show back together. I didn't want to make any waves. I remember we played those songs, and it was just dead, and about 8 hands raised in the air like you could count the hands. they're playing Come Back, which was never on an album. It was one of our big club songs. After that, the guys said, no more putting that stuff in the show because it is really self-serving. It caters to a very small part of the audience. So, Dee Snider is saying empirically, we tried this out and it's not really working because we don't have enough people who really do know the back catalog. Then when he was coming back to Metallica, he says, listen, unless you're buying both, and maybe that's the idea, shake them down, get them to buy both tickets so they're hearing every song because they're diehards. But Metallica's audience has grown so far beyond just hardcore fans. They have hits. And so, most of the people going to a Metallica show are not probably lifelong Metallica fans. And then he talked about Iron Maiden touring, and they played an entire new album and they refused to play any of the hits. And Snyder said the audience was furious. Bruce Dickinson was yelling at the crowd because they weren't getting into it. And he said, again, we see this word, it was self-serving to do that. And next year they came back and it was the biggest hits because they had to make up for that. So we've got 3 bands and their decisions about what playlists to use on tour. And these are all massive bands that had their origins in the 70s and 80s, Metallica, Twisted Sister, and Iron Maiden. So, I think Snyder is really opening up an interesting can of worms here. Before we go on, Scott, what do you want to say about Snyder's remarks?
Well, is it true that Metallica's not playing any hits each night, first of all? And
Yeah.
Iron Maiden actually did. The album was only about an hour long. Maiden played for 2 hours, which meant they had an hour of hits after that. So they did play the Iron Maiden on that tour, played the entire album, and then they played all the stuff people wanted to hear. So he's wrong about that.
Okay.
And then, the fact that he's calling it a money grab, like he's projecting what this negative spin on choosing different songs every night. I mean,
yeah, there's really two distinct negative things. It's a money grab, right? And we can say that maybe about Kiss,
yeah, but Kiss plays the same set list every night.
I know.
And that's what,
But he also says it's self-serving, and I don't think that that's just about money. I think we could talk about like self-serving in terms of like indulging yourself. I want to be the big star on the stage and I'll play whatever the hell I want and screw the rest of you if you don't like it. That would be, I think, what he's saying.
That's quite a comment.
Okay.
Because look, his Twisted Sister example was playing for a festival crowd. He wasn't playing for Twisted Sister fans. He was playing for people that maybe didn't like Twisted Sister, but they only knew their hits. So his analogy of like, hey, when we tried it, it didn't work. But that wasn't a Twisted Sister show. That was a show with multi-bands that Eddie Trunk put on.
Right. So that might be an important clarification later on. Maybe we have to say, okay, if you're doing your own show and you're the headliner, one set of criteria. If you're like, one of the bands we're going to look at, Raven, played in Milwaukee Metal Fest. And we're going to look at a few set lists. And they actually did play some deep cuts. And they played some new music off of Metal City. But they only played 6 songs, so it's not much of a set list.
Yeah.
So Chris has a suggestion. Hour 1 hits and nothing but. Hour 2 deep cuts, as self-serving as you like. Encore, 3 big hits. This is the ideal show. The average concert goer can go to the bathroom in hour 2 or buy more beer or leave early. The second hour, in effect, is free. The other 90 minutes gives the ticket buyer what they expect. The second hour is a free education in how the band is more than just the hits. Yeah, that's kind of a cool idea. Now, notice you do have to be able to fill the venue and get to decide your own stuff. So that might not work, say, if you're working at a casino and they're like, we only want you to play the hits. Mark says, which serves the audience better, only ever playing the hits or having diversity in terms of the types of shows offered? That's a good question.
But I want to bring up Um, when you say fans or
Hmm.
audience, what do you mean? Do you mean the window shoppers, right? The nostalgia people? I mean, I love Def Leppard, but I won't buy a ticket to see them because they're stuck in 1988. And um, you choose your audience by your set list. If you tour
Hmm.
the hits only, the diehards aren't going to go, but the people that want to buy $12 beers and sing along with Pour Some Sugar on Me, well, that's your audience. And there's those videos that went up of Def Leppard playing, and somebody scrolled the audience, and everybody's talking, everybody's on their phone, nobody's paying attention to the band. It's background because they always play most of Hysteria, and or is it a better idea? I mean, look, some of this has to do with the audience unable to hear new music. Now, when I used to go to shows and a
Yeah.
band played their new album and I hadn't heard it yet, and the band was on fire and the songs were good, I was out the next day buying the album
Yeah.
because the songs were so good. But a lot of bands will put albums out, like Night Ranger would do that, and
And
like
then not supported, as you've mentioned in the past. Yeah.
they wouldn't play anything. And like my general rule is at least five songs from the new album, and
For a full show.
for a full show in five
Yeah.
songs,
Yeah.
25 minutes, right? But like, who's your audience? So when Dee Snyder says it's self-serving, most people, well, wait a minute. Um, Metallica has fans, but if you're going to completely cater to the people that know nothing else matters and think that's Metallica, I mean, is that, you know,
Yeah.
is that? But I think I would love most bands to do different set every night.
I mean, I think it's interesting that Metallica probably has a bigger proportion of people who are just casual fans than, like, if you go to see like Judas Priest, right? You're probably going to have a greater proportion of people who have been listening to them for a long time, have a lot of albums, maybe not the whole catalog, but plenty of it, have some merch already, maybe one or
Yes.
two concert t-shirts. Um, Whereas Metallica, because they made it so big, I mean, actually, we could compare Metallica and Megadeth. I would be willing to say that at a Megadeth show, you're going to have more people who are like solid Megadeth fans than proportion wise than
Yeah.
Metallica you would. Um, let's before we dive into the other stuff, let's take these other comments. So Ken says, I broadly agree with that. I think Chris's idea, the good balance to be had between hits and deeper back catalog tracks for the hardcore fans. And then Chris says, my proposal is a variation on the old saying about guitar solo. So I'll be curious to see what you say about this, Scott. I think Eddie Van Halen said it. You start out cool and you end with something amazing, but you can crap all over the stage in the middle because no one will remember that part.
Oh, it's interesting talking about the unaccompanied solo in the rock show. Like,
Oh,
I always hate drum solos
okay.
because,
Why?
well, they're all rock shows. They're mostly the same, and like you're listening to it, going like, this could have been two more songs. And
Oh,
even guitar solos, unless they're playing a solo piece, if they're just getting up there and like noodling, I'm like, well, that was two more songs right there, you know. And
yeah.
but anyways, I just wanted
What
to
if
throw that in there. That
let me throw a counterexample out there though. So when Van Halen picked up Sammy Hagar, he kept his guitar. And I remember seeing them on the 5150 tour. And I think
oh
they
yeah,
might have done this on Monsters of Rock too when OU 812 was out in 88. They did like a guitar duel. And obviously it was staged, right? I mean, they're not just like making the stuff up on the spot. And I think Eddie Van Halen pretty clearly won it because
yeah.
Sammy Hagar is not a Eddie Van Halen, but they were like doing call and response kind of with each other with their guitars. So I mean, is that something where you'd be like, okay, that could have been a song, but I'm willing to let this be part of the show.
You mean at the end of the tune, like the tune's vamping on the
No, they
outro?
they they were playing like, on stage, just the two of them. I think maybe Michael Anthony was laying down a bass track or something.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, Yeah, that's still, yeah, that's still a little different to me than, like, hearing the guitar player like, basically, especially back then, guitarists had plenty of solos and plenty of, but like to
Right.
take 5 minutes and have them, I mean, even as a guitar player, I never liked that, you know,
Yeah.
unless they
I
played, like Warren DeMartini did something so cool, like lay it down in the middle, they brought it way down and just did that vamp in the
mm,
bridge part, and he played this bluesy thing that built up. That was amazing, and it
but
was very
that's part of a
graceful.
song rather than being a standalone guitar solo.
Right, and everything he played was so musical, and he had this great tone, and it was like, he was making a musical statement rather. He was more communicating than demonstrating at that point.
Okay. Chris has a funny comment. Drum solo equals bathroom break, both for band and for audience. And that's probably true. I mean,
Actually, you know what?
with these older musicians,
Yeah,
some of them probably need to go. And I mean, if you're doing a 2 hour show,
yeah,
and you're a 67-year-old, yeah, maybe you got to go to the
yeah.
bathroom halfway through.
Yeah. Well, for anybody, and then like, the drummer will get a break during like the acoustic, maybe there's an
True.
acoustic
Yeah.
thing or whatever,
Yeah.
so
Well, I do want to come back to some of the notes. So when we're talking about bands, right? We're not talking about new bands. We're talking about classic bands. And I thought, well, what criteria can we use to narrow this down so we're not like spilling over into everything? And Snyder uses the word heritage bands, which I kind of like, or legacy is another term. So these are bands that had their origins in the 70s or the 80s or maybe even early 90s. They have a significant catalog, so they could have deep cuts, right? Because if you got a band that's only got like 2 or 3 albums, they don't really have deep cuts because they haven't produced enough for those cuts to get lost. They also have to be bands that had a significant committed fan base that ranged from like the hardcore fanatics who have every single album all the way to people who have, just kind of go because they like them. So they have to have hits that are familiar to people and be able to draw people who are willing to see that band, but won't necessarily recognize all the rest of the music. So, Metallica and Twisted Sister and Iron Maiden are good examples. I would say Saxon is a great example of that. They've been continually producing albums. I think they're up to like number 17 or 18 at this point. Raven, Judas Priest, of course, the Scorpions, Kiss. Although Kiss hasn't been producing new music for quite a while.
right.
So, who doesn't meet these criteria? I would say, like Thin Lizzy is a good example. They were a great band, but after Phil Lynott died, they kind of petered out. They've been put back together, but they've deliberately decided not to make new music, right? So they're not there's no new cuts for them to listen to. Rat, good example as well, in part because they can't keep a stable legacy lineup. It's now basically just I was going to say Warren DeMartini, but he's the one that's not in it anymore. And I think
Right.
without him, it's not Rat.
Yeah, I agree.
It's just Juan Crochier and I'm blanking on his name, the singer.
Stephen Piercy.
There we go, Stephen Piercy. And then whoever else they hire to fit in. So I don't think that, and Rat didn't have that big of a catalog anyway. 7, 8 albums total.
So yeah.
So, and they did have a lot of hits, but not a lot of recent ones. So, this isn't really an absolutely new issue. We've had some crazy stuff where, for example, Motorhead's Another Perfect Day tour had Brian Robertson from Thin Lizzy, and he totally refused to play the legacy music. And this is in the 80s, right? And it cut their fan base in half because people were like, who is this jackass? And why won't he play Overkill or Ace of Spades or Iron Fist or any of those sorts of things? Scorpions, from the 1980s onward, they just stopped playing the John Roth era stuff, which is really great, but you don't hear it. It's almost as if there was one era and then another era. Van Halen, after David Lee Roth was replaced by Sammy Hagar, one of the things that kind of sucked about their performances at like Monsters of Rock, they only played a few songs from the first 6 albums.
I think
They
they only had two in the sets, right? They had
That
Ain't
sounds
Talking
right.
About
Yeah.
Love and maybe Panama, but I
That's right.
think
Yeah, yeah.
maybe those two.
Yeah. And so, in a way they're making a decision about whether they're going to play the new music, or I mean at that time it's really more about let's play the new music, not let's play the deep cuts or classic stuff. So, I think that this is not an absolutely new issue, but I think there's some new wrinkles to it. We could talk about how do you pass on the legacy from one generation to the next.
Well,
Go
I
ahead.
sorry to interrupt you, but I have a question for everybody. So this, I think I might take. Um, I don't think I'm gonna accept this word deep cuts
Hmm.
because um, I think we all come from about the same generation approximately. Now we heard a song. Let's take Twisted Sister.
Yeah.
Um, we're not going to take it on MTV. You love it.
Yeah.
We all go out and buy the record, right? And how many? I mean, that went double platinum. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
we sold a lot of those records. And what do? We put the needle on. We listen to the whole record all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
am I alone? Did everybody like when when there was what was a round and round out of the cellar, right? So we
Yep.
all bought out of the cellar, but I think we all know every song on that album.
Yeah.
So if you play, any given song from the first album, I don't, I wouldn't call that a deep cut because now we're in a singles era where,
I think though that there were a lot of people, and I think there's two different types here. There's the people who are coming to it nowadays from like the vantage point of the present, and they're like, oh yeah, I've heard about this Rat band, they sound pretty good, I'll listen to their stuff like in maybe a Spotify playlist, and that's mostly going to be hits, and they might not know. So they're off of Out of the Cellar, they're going to know Wanted Man, they're going to know Round and Round. They might know The Morning After, which is actually probably my favorite song off of that
great
one.
one.
But they're probably not going to know She Wants Money,
But
you know.
but we're back to again, who are you playing for? Are you
Well,
playing
that's yeah, that's what we're gonna get to. But
Yeah,
I think that you could nowadays call those deep cuts if they haven't been played in set lists for a while, you know. And then some of the older fans who had the record but then haven't really been listening to it for years and years, they'd be at the concert and you could play one of those songs and they'd be like, oh yeah, or like Scene of the Crime, right? They'd be like, oh, I remember that one,
yeah.
but they'd struggle to remember all the lyrics to it. Whereas with Round and Round, I mean, everyone's going to know that. And I think it's something else that had an effect on this. And I didn't put this into the notes. Guitar Hero and karaoke have widened people's tastes in a certain way. So like, you can get metal artists in the typical karaoke thing, but you're not going to get like their whole catalog. You're only going to get from Twisted Sister, We're Not Going to Take It. You're not going to get Run for Your Life, right? So if your main introduction to that stuff is through these, what would you call them? Like alternate media
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
things, games, you're those are going to be deep cuts in relation to you.
Yeah.
Mark says I occasionally sit down and listen to an album from front to back, but not nearly as much as when I was younger.
Right. So I'm
Yeah.
saying back then we know all those albums. So,
Yeah.
but even back then, the band would be on their fourth album, and there'd be, the drum head would have the album cover on. All the merch was the new
Yeah. Yeah.
this tour. But now they'll put out a new album and kind of apologize for it by not including it. Which, why did you make the record? I
Yeah,
get
and we'll look at some set lists of bands in a bit who aren't doing that, who are really supporting the new things.
Mm.
It's kind of weird because just looking at it from the outside, you couldn't predict who is actually playing their new stuff and who isn't. You'd have to kind of know the background of the band, I think.
Mhm.
Um, here's a good point from Ken. Knowledge of early material for those sorts of bands will be dependent on, to some degree, to media exposure for the band. So Maiden never got significant radio airtime even after becoming famous. So more casual fans may know very few of their early tracks, and I think
Yeah.
that's quite true. You know, you could hear the Scorpions on, so our local like hard rock heavy metal station was WQFM in the 1980s, and you would hear the Scorpions on there. You would actually hear like Dio, you know, stuff off Holy Diver, or you know when Last in Line came out. But you might hear, you know who else you wouldn't hear? Judas Priest. So you didn't hear Iron Maiden, you didn't hear Judas Priest, you didn't hear Motorhead.
No, not
But
Motorhead.
you would hear Motley Crue and Rat and Wasp. I remember hearing Manowars, Dark, was it Black Wind, Fire and Steel, on the radio, you know. But yeah, you probably wouldn't hear Iron Maiden, you know.
They
So
had the one Wasted Years was the only one that made it on MTV, I think, right? That was early.
well, I think you know they would do like Run to the Hills. They had a video for that too.
Yeah, yeah, they did. But I remember just like I had to wait for like the metal hour on radio stations, and you'd hear Maiden and you know,
Yeah,
heard the Trooper first, and I was hooked. But then you know, I bought the whole album, and listened to the whole album because
yeah.
you know it was it was all going to be awesome. You know,
Well,
we
what you
tried.
could say is we were consuming the reproductions in a different way, right?
Yeah,
Than the situation that we're in now. So I did some polling about this. Now, totally unscientific, right? Because I'm just putting it out there in my social media. And sad to say, I could only get stuff from Twitter, YouTube, and Mastodon. And I say sad to say because there's actually a heavy metal group on LinkedIn, and I tried posting it there and they didn't approve it. So I didn't get any data from them, right?
wow.
So now here's where it gets kind of interesting. In Twitter, um, Deep Cuts from the Past was the leader. 46% of the people said that's what they most wanted to hear in a performance from a band who's a legacy band, has a big catalog, all that sort of stuff. The hits everyone knows, 30.9%. New songs from the last album, you're not going to like this, Scott, 7.4%. You know,
What if it's a good album?
well, that wasn't one of the differentiators that we had. So, you know, you can only put so many things. I did put
Right.
something else, and people did say some other interesting things, some of which are sort of like Chris's remarks. John Barbas, the heavy metal philosophy host, said, I voted something else. I most want to see my favorite song, but I get thrilled to see something I haven't seen them play before. So if you've gone multiple times, maybe you do want to see something different, not something necessarily new. Jeff Sullivan said, I hit new songs, but honestly, I want to hear what the band is excited about. If they
Yeah.
don't have anything new, I'm fine with nostalgic tours, you know.
What the
And
band?
then Bree takes one L or one loss, said, new album and deep cuts for concerts, classics, and hits for festivals as God intended,
Okay.
which is kind of like what I think you were saying earlier,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Festivals, you don't want to you play the whole new album. I mean, not this day and age. Festivals are kind of a different audience. Well, it's like casinos.
Yeah.
I asked, well, my friend was in Night Ranger for a while, and I said, why are you playing AC/DC tunes and all this stuff? He's like, well, because Jack thinks we're in a casino, and you know he'll bring people out like you know that are like playing the slots maybe to come in and
Mm.
listen or buy merch. And I said, I guess that kind of makes sense, but you know you have such amazing hits on your own. But like they were doing
Yeah,
AC.
it's weird. It's like turning a band that has its own catalog into half and half a cover band, right?
Yeah, I don't understand it. And it's so interesting about this um, because you know, best case scenario, the band does what they're excited about, and you know, nobody's saying don't play any hits. You know,
No,
it's not really an all or
that would
nothing.
not be a good strategy.
I mean, you know, the worst thing I've ever seen that was kind of self-serving, and he's not metal, but months ago I went to see Todd Rundgren, and he
Okay.
did the goofiest cover songs. Like,
Really?
what's that tune? You got a brand new pair of skates, I've got a brand new key,
Oh
or something.
yeah.
And he did, that 500 mile song, and he did this atrocity of goofy covers, and
You'd be like, who do you think you are? Weird Al Yankovic?
well, I mean, but those are clearly songs he's not excited about. Are you trying to be artistic? And I also did see Todd do the whole new album once, which was
Yeah.
fine with me. And then he came back and did five big hits. But I'd rather see him do the whole album than just like mess with us
Yeah, yeah.
and like play silly stuff. I mean, I don't think we could accuse Metallica or anybody from like being silly.
No. I mean, and they're playing stuff from their catalog. Um, Ken says Maiden tried playing an entire new album in the early 90s in Israel. It was a disaster with lots of people leaving halfway through. So what would that have been at early 90s?
Early
Um,
90s, that's when was that Fear of the Dark?
Probably, yeah, yeah.
Well, they did
That,
that with
that would have
Matter.
been after Seventh Son of Seventh Son, because that was like still in the 80s, right?
That was
88.
88.
Yeah, yeah.
And they also didn't have Dickinson or Adrian Smith.
By the early 90s, I think didn't Dickinson leave in like the mid 90s, I think.
Maybe. I kind of like
Yeah,
when Adrian Smith left, I kind of fell off.
yeah. We saw Primus recently, about a year ago, and Primus really well the Les Claypool he really likes Rush, and
Oh yeah, they're good friends.
they played like the typical thing, couple new songs, a lot of classic songs, and then the second half of the concert, because they did take like a break halfway through, was playing Rush's Farewell to Kings, the whole album. And some people were, I mean, it was clear that like some of the people in the audience were like, I don't care what Primus plays, they could like crap in a pot and I would listen to it. But others were like, what the hell is going on here?
Right. Yeah,
But
That's
they'd advertised ahead of time, we're going to do this, so
Oh,
you
okay, yeah.
know it wasn't like they just sprung it on people and they're like, we're not playing any Primus songs tonight, just Rush.
But here's a quick example. You and I saw the same Judas Priest tour, was it last year, a few years ago? And you and I
Firepower,
were
are you
both
thinking about
what's that?
Firepower?
Yeah, but you and I were both so excited that they put Take These Chains
Oh,
in the
right,
set,
right, right. Yeah,
and everybody was talking about how cool that was,
yeah.
as because that hasn't really been in their set.
No,
And so there's examples of, hey, well, it could be like, oh, in my city, I got to see them do these three songs. And especially now with people posting shows on their iPhone,
yeah.
you've already seen the show, you already know the set list. It's good to switch things around anyhow, I think.
I think you could make a case that in a way that makes the performance a bit more special when you can say you guys didn't get to see them performing this song, that everybody got to see them performing this song because they always do that in every set list, but I got to see them doing this one and that was a treat,
Yes,
provided they play it well. I mean, if they're rusty and it sucks, then maybe it backfires. you know
right. Yeah, I definitely, yeah, I mean, I do like that when somebody, like, when it's not expected, because we have this thing, I'm sure everybody's seen Setlists FM,
Oh,
and
right, yeah,
you can look up, set lists from any tour, any date, or the shows
yep,
are all recorded on there, like, and that's before the internet, where they could, most of them were fairly consistent. They were swapping out some tunes, bands back then, but
yeah.
I would think nowadays would be the time to, you don't have to go totally obscure, but like swap it around so you get something special when you go. You have that experience that is specific to that night, you know.
Well, let's look at some of we'll skip the rest of the polling, which was more or less along the same lines, except for Mastodon, where they were less interested in deep cuts and more interested in the hits. Let's look at some of these set lists. So Wasp, they were on tour recently. Big deal because Blackie Lawless hadn't toured for Blackie Lawless is Wasp, hadn't toured for about 10 years. And there was a lot of buzz about how all the set lists were exactly the same. And so everything that they did was either what we could call a classic hit, or it was off of the Crimson Idol, which is 1992. I mean, I guess you could call that classic stuff as well, which means that everything was a classic hit. There weren't really anything that you could call a deep cut, and there isn't any new music to play. And every single place more or less got the same set list. And I follow them on Facebook with the Wasp, I think it's Wasp Nation or something, and a lot of people were complaining that, hey, if I wanted to go see exactly the same show as they did in Dallas, I would just go to the Dallas show. What do you think about bands that are always just sticking to formula when it comes to set lists?
Well, that's
I
why.
mean, go ahead.
That's the reason I don't buy tickets to see some shows.
Okay.
Now, you know, ticket prices are insane.
Yeah, there's that too.
So, making that purchase and, the bands that will, I mean, you could pretty much, you'll know what they're going to play. Yeah, I don't, sticking to the formula thing, but again, it goes back to who is your audience?
Yeah.
And, you know, a kind of interesting question. If you mixed it up and played like a lot of new stuff, a lot of deep cuts, and some hits, are you okay with playing like 5,000 seaters, like House of Blues, or
Yeah, yeah.
and or do you want to? I mean, I guess just playing the hits every summer. You always have people just buying tickets because, but it's more of a nostalgia thing for people, which is there's people out there that you could sell tickets to, but it depends on how you want to portray yourself. I mean, if you want to be like, let's not rehearse, let's just go out, and I think the cash grab is keeping the same set list.
So actually, Ken's comment here is on point with what we are just talking about. Very good point. Even for heritage bands, I expect them to be professional and actually rehearse their earlier material if they intend to play it. Yeah, I mean, so bands where it is just a cash grab and they're like, oh, let's reunite and we'll go on tour, but nobody's actually played the songs for 10 years. That's probably not going to be a good performance. And it probably is just a cash grab, and some musicians, it's like any other profession. You got to keep working because the money's got to keep coming in. Unless you had, something that like set you for life. I mean, interestingly, like Diamond Head, because Metallica covered Am I Evil, they said that made more for them than any other song than they ever wrote. And it like
Sure.
kept them afloat, right? But I think there are bands like this. And actually, this is a good segue to another band that perhaps needs to hang it up at this point. And that's Kiss. And I love Kiss. They were the first heavy metal band that I ever heard, but that was in the 1970s when I was a kid.
Mhm.
And they're fun to see live, but they basically just do the same thing every show. And when we looked at, so here's a very recent set list from the Enterprise Center in St. Louis in 2023. They did Detroit Rock City, Shout It Out Loud, Deuce, 3 1970s hits, all very big, right? Everybody knows those, except maybe Deuce. That's probably, I guess you could call Deuce maybe a deep cut for people who are diehard Kiss fans. Then they did a couple from the 80s, War Machine, Heaven's on Fire, I Love It Loud. The only song that they did from their latest album, Sonic Boom, is Say Yeah. And then it's back to the 70s, Cold Gin, Lick It Up, Calling Dr. Love, Making Love. Then they did a song from Psycho Circus, which is another, you could say recent album, but it's from 1998, so it's not a recent album. And then they wrapped it up with going back to the 70s, 100,000 Years, God of Thunder, Love Gun, I Was Made for Loving You, and Black Diamond, all 1970s stuff. And so, it's cool to go to a Kiss show. There's the makeup, there's the pyrotechnics, you hear the songs that you grew up on and you loved, but there's really nothing new happening there. And, there's been talk about, and we've talked about this on the show before, about Kiss becoming a franchise after Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons stopped touring. They could just like put another guy in the makeup and have them play it, take them out of a Kiss tribute band,
Yeah.
right? I think that's where they found Tommy Thayer, right?
I,
Is that right?
no,
Or was he a guitar tech?
I think he was both that I heard. He wasn't a Kiss tribute band, but he was the guitar tech. I don't know if I can't confirm this, but Ace didn't show up, so they put Tommy Thayer in the makeup because
Yeah.
he knew the tunes from being in there. So
Yeah.
he happened to be there. That I should confirm that, but I've heard that from a lot of sources where it was just kind of like, well, all the songs we're putting you in the makeup.
Yeah. And so with a band like that, maybe you could just like slot other people in. But what would they be doing? It would be like the Thin Lizzy thing that we were talking about. Nobody's going to make anything new. It's just going to be, like you said, nostalgia. I think if you go to see a Kiss show, you're basically just going for nostalgia purposes now.
Yeah, they stopped supporting albums after Hot in the Shade, I feel like. Oh no, Revenge did
Okay.
okay for them, right? Because they returned to their heavy roots. But I'd be interested to see what they did on the Revenge tour
Yeah,
because they weren't in makeup again yet.
that's right. Yeah.
And I think they were still doing, oh, even like the Crazy Nights tour. I think they only did like 3 of the Crazy Nights song in a night
Yeah.
on tour, which was
I mean, and in a way, if the bigger you are early on, the more you've got to live up to, you know?
yeah,
So let's take another band which is doing something very different and is just as big as like say Kiss, the
yeah,
Scorpions. So they have a new album out, Rock Believer, that came out in 2022, and Scott and I reviewed it a while back. They played 4 songs in their set list off of the new album. That's
amazing.
definitely supporting the new album. Now everything else was basically either from their 79 to 84 Matthias Jobs, let's call it Incarnation 1 era. So everything from Love Drive up to Love at First Sting. There were, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 songs from that, which is understandable. Nothing from earlier, no Uli John Roth era stuff, which I'd want to see. But
Yeah.
maybe they figured, well, that's his songs and he gets to play it. And then there was a lot of stuff off of Crazy World. Three songs, Send Me an Angel, Winds of Change. I mean, they're
Yeah.
always going to do that. And then Tease Me, Please Me. I don't really like that album that much. I thought it was a misstep. I also thought the one before it was a misstep.
Well, Tease
But
Me, Please Me was like, it's got to be the worst one off that album.
well, they certainly thought it was important to have it in the tour though. But
I
I
saw it,
mean,
yeah.
it is nice that they are supporting the new album.
It's amazing, yeah.
Is there anything in there that you could call a deep cut? I think those are all hits.
Well,
There's not.
let's see. No, I mean, yeah, but you give them credit for the new stuff
Yeah.
because, you know, there are some bands still doing new stuff, and it's like, if you're proud of the album, and it's, I have this feeling like if it's really a great tune and you play it great, you're gonna hit,
Mhm.
you're gonna connect with people unless they're completely unwilling to hear anything new, right?
I mean,
Like,
that kind of goes to Ken's point about they actually have to be playing well, right? They have to be rehearsed. They have to know the music.
yeah, I mean, yeah, and if you put it out there like you did your new album back in the day, but if you're attracting the kind of audience that expects you to do nothing but what they want you to do, I mean,
Yeah.
look at the trend right now is people in tribute bands. They'll fill theaters, and the tribute bands don't even have to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
good. They could be like, there's like how many Tom Petty tribute bands around here in Massachusetts. And
You know, we saw Steven Adler at Summerfest, and he's the original drummer of Guns N' Roses, so he's got a claim to use the name, I guess, to some degree. He's got to be, can't say he's Guns N' Roses. It's got to be like Steven Adler's something or other
right.
that you typically do. And he played a set, and me and Kat went to see it, and it was sandwiched in between Vixen, who was amazing, and Queensryche, who we're going to talk about in a minute, who is, it just blew everybody away. And Adler's band was basically a Guns N' Roses tribute band. They played the hits. There's nothing new for them to play. There were no deep cuts of any sort, in part because those first two albums of Guns N' Roses, which almost everything was taken off of, had so many hits that you could fill up a hour and a half set easily,
Yeah. And then actually my friend's the current guitarist of Vixen,
Okay.
Brittany, and I've seen them a bunch of times, but they're pretty much the same set all the
Yeah.
time. Um,
The energy that they brought, though, was pretty amazing. And that new
yeah.
bassist that they have,
Oh,
who also sings.
that's Richie Kotzen's wife.
Okay.
Yeah, I love her. She's a great player, great performer. I mean,
She reminds me of Juan Crochier, where
oh, interesting. Yeah.
when you think about the voice of Rat, which is what Stephen Percy bills himself as, it's kind of false advertising. This is a bit of a digression,
Yeah.
because him by himself is not the voice of Rat. He is one half of the voice of Rat. Juan Crochier singing the harmonies, just like Michael Anthony, in Van
Right.
Halen, singing the high harmonies, integral to the sound, right? And she brought this new bassist, just brought this incredible energy and precision, heaviness to Vixen's sound. I think they're better now than they were back in their early, legacy era.
And I think the only original member is Roxy, the
The
drummer.
drummer, yeah,
Yeah, because they just got the new singer. But they're I've seen a bunch live, and I mean Britt fits the role, the guitarist, perfectly. She's actually when she told me she got the gig, I said, "You're so perfect for that." Like that's of course.
She's
Um,
also in Paradise Kitty, isn't she? In the all-female uh Guns N' Roses tribute band.
I don't think she is. No, one of my
Okay,
students,
I might be mixing her up with somebody else then.
yeah, I had one of the student in that, but now she's on the road with someone else. But yeah, it's that LA scene.
Okay.
And then Queensryche.
Yeah, let's jump to them. So Milwaukee Summerfest, right? So this is a music festival. They played a lot of like big hits, and where did the big hits come from? Their two most successful albums were Operation Mindcrime and Empire, right? And so they played,
Oh yeah.
I think they played 3 songs from Empire and 4 songs from Operation Mindcrime. And then they played some really deep cuts, Walk in the Shadows from Rage for Order. Roads to Madness is what they finished with from The Warning. They actually played 3
Deliverance.
songs from The Warning. And they played Queen of the Reich, which you kind of expect, but that's the deepest of deep cuts. That's from their EP when they were just starting out. And they supported the new album. They played 3 songs off of Digital Noise Alliance. They opened the concert with that, which I think is kind of a bold move, rather than like doing one of the songs off of Empire that everybody would have recognized, like Jet City Woman, right? They could have opened with that. Instead, they opened with Behind the Walls, and it was an amazing performance. They were super heavy. They were, going back to Ken's point too about like being practiced. They were super tight. It was. I mean, Kat and I walked away from that. We're like, holy crap! This is them at Summerfest. Imagine what they must be like in concert somewhere else.
Right. And I just saw Jeff Tate a couple months ago. He's got his voice back.
Oh, good.
I mean, they did Queen of the Reich, and I mean, he was on fire. I mean, he quit smoking, I guess. His voice. That's what.
So that was what it was.
That's what it was. Like
Yeah.
because like even what was that album they did in like the late '90s, early 2000s? That Queensryche Live, where they did like a few songs from every album. he was really struggling even then, and he quit smoking, and I can't believe the notes that came out of him.
Yeah. You know, that reminds me of something. This is a total digression. So we'll come back to the actual topic in a minute. But on Judas Priest's Epitaph tour, that was supposed to be it for them. So we're talking like 2012, 2013, if I remember right.
All right.
And they had this very long set. I want to say they played well into like the 20s in the number of songs. And they there was a story for each of the songs. It was like, here's what we started with, you know, this is off of Rockarola, this is off of our second album. Rob Halford is explaining all this kind of stuff, and it was like a musical lesson through the catalog. And sometimes he'd actually say, we did this song because of this, you know, or he started, you know, reminiscing about Diamonds and Rust and Joan Baez not being pissed at him, but rather being like, this is a great version, you know. And it was a pretty amazing experience, you know. Now it was also a farewell tour that didn't turn out to be a farewell tour. We've talked about that before.
Well, one that we excuse for right reasons.
Exactly. Yeah. Because they thought, you know, that medical reasons were going to prevent it. So, well, let's talk about fans, right? So this is something that we've kind of skated around a little bit. Can we distinguish different kinds of fans? Because then we could say maybe we have different obligations to different fans. So the most superficial relationship, I think, is the fan who just knows a few hit songs by the band, and they bought their t-shirt at Target and they go to see them because it might be fun or something. It's part of a festival. They've got some money to burn on, you know, concert seats. They're doing a date or something like that. Let's go see Metallica. I think I've heard Enter Sandman before, you know, and it's easy enough to get a Metallica shirt, but they don't care. They know Master of Puppets only because it was in Stranger Things.
Exactly.
You know? So that's one kind of fan. And I don't know what we should call them, but they're almost not even fans, right? They're just audience, we could say.
Right.
Okay. Do you think there's a name that we should give them, or?
I call them window shoppers.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. And then we have fans who are actually into heavy metal music, but they don't know the band that well, but they're like, it'd be cool to go see them. I've heard about them. I think a lot of the people who go to see Saxon are probably like that, you know, because Saxon is often touring with somebody else, and Saxon is great, but they don't have the name recognition that Judas Priest does, who they've toured with, or some of the other bands. Wasp touring with Armored Saint. Armored Saint is actually out on tour with Queensryche. And Armored Saint, they're a great band. They just don't have the kind of name recognition that other people do. So like Kat was actually telling me this morning when we were discussing our topic, she's like, you know, when we went and saw Wasp and Armored Saint, I didn't actually know any of Armored Saint's songs, but it was a great set and it made me want to listen to them, you know. So that's a kind of fan, and you're going to have plenty of people like that at a show, you know. And then we have like the fans, and I call them sanguine fans, because maybe they know the catalog, maybe they don't. They just kind of remember the hits. They're just happy to see that the band isn't dead, and you know, that they can go to it. They're like, oh, this is great. You know, I remember seeing the Scorpions back in the 80s. It's awesome that they're playing now. You know, oh, I remember hearing that song, you know, what's that song? I'll go get a beer now, you know?
Yeah, right.
But they're not like going to bitch and whine about it, right? And then we have the amateur music critic who's got very definite ideas about what the band should or shouldn't be playing. And they might be a fan, but they're kind of more of a jerk than anything else.
Right.
They're like dictating, you know, why didn't they play this deep cut, you know? And you're like, man, they haven't played that since 87, you know?
Right.
And then we have dedicated fans who got into the bands really early on. And you brought this up a little bit earlier. So like, think about Kiss. I think this is a great example. There's a lot of fans of Kiss who like know all the early stuff up until like the early 80s. And then they don't really know anything after that because they quit buying records. They love the, you know, Detroit Rock City or I Love It Loud, but they don't know anything off of Psycho Circus because they haven't listened to that album, and it didn't get a lot of airplay. And I think, you know, there's some Iron Maiden fans like that. There's you know, fans for all sorts of bands like that. And then we have the dedicated fans who they're like the super fans. They have been there from the start, or from early on. They bought every single album. They've got import stuff. They've got merch from back in the 80s all the way to the most recent t-shirt or something like that. They have a coffee mug. They drink Iron Maiden's what is their beer, the Trooper
Oh,
beer.
the Trooper, yeah.
These are now here's the question that we have to ask. So if we make these distinctions, and I'd be curious, did I leave anybody out? If we make these distinctions, does this help us say, okay, maybe you have a greater duty as a band to these groups, the ones who like carried you through during the lean times and kept buying your albums, or should you be like what Dee Snyder said and cater to the people that are there to hear the hits, But first, did I leave out any kind of fan, do you think?
Oh, this is pretty this is more than I even kind of thought of. So this is a pretty thorough list. I mean,
Okay.
we get more nitpicky, but um no, I mean I tend to look at like them in like maybe two, maybe three categories. Uh,
Okay.
it's basically between you know, I like what you said about, oh, that might be fun to go see that band that did. I mean, I remember go drive. There's an outdoor venue here. It's like a 10,000 seater. It's called Great Woods. It's an out,
Oh, I've heard of it. Yeah. Yeah.
and my friends and I would just drive there back in the day and ask who was playing. And tickets were only $10, $12. I mean, they were nothing.
Oh,
So we would just go see whatever it was. And
yeah.
I remember like when Richard Marx came out with his first album, they're like, "Oh, it's Richard Marx tonight." I'm like, "Oh, doesn't he have that song Don't Mean Nothing?" Yeah, like let's go see it. And I remember like being floored at all the other songs besides that one. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so I guess
We
what's
don't really get too much of that opportunity anymore with these kind of bands, right? I mean, and there's still venues that you can go to where there's going to be new music. Again, I'll use Summerfest as an example. So it is a
right?
festival. You pay to get in. And then if you want to go see like the headliners, you got to pay extra to go to the BMO Harris or the American Family stages. But all the rest, you can just like wander around and hear whatever you want to hear. So you'll take a chance. As a matter of fact, there was one time where Kat and I went, and we went to see Foghat, and they sucked. And Slaughter, hair band. I mean, they really are a hair band from the late 80s, early 90s. But Kat's like, should we go see Slaughter? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I saw them play with Kiss years ago, basically because I had to as part of, it was Slaughter and Warrant and Kiss. And interestingly, it was me and my buddy, and we were there with two dates, and the dates were like totally into Warrant and Slaughter, and we were there for Kiss, and so like they were standing up and we were sitting down, and then vice versa in our grass seats. So anyway, we went to go see Slaughter about like maybe 3 songs into their set, and we're like, holy shit, these guys are great. I remember some of these songs, and then they played new songs.
Yeah.
And Kat was like, why didn't we go to Slaughter instead of Foghat? And I was like, well, I thought Foghat would be good, And part of what, as a matter of fact, too, Foghat wasn't playing the things that you'd want to hear, like Slow Ride, They're
Oh,
playing all sorts of other stuff. And you're like, who the hell are these guys? Well, it turns out that Foghat isn't really Foghat anymore. It's one of those bands where
oh,
it's changed composition so many times. But, prime example, right?
yeah. Yep.
So Mark says, I was lucky enough to see Maiden when they came to South Africa. My fondest memory of the show was how excited I got when they played half of UFO's Doctor, Doctor to warm up. My highlight wasn't
Yeah.
even a Maiden song. Every time I hear that song, I think of that show. Yeah. I'm glad I got to see some hits. I even enjoyed doing the dumb monkey dance from their new song. What makes the show special can be quite unpredictable for the audience and the band. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. You can't reduce this down to like a science or something.
Right. Yeah. True. I think, you know, a lot of it, like back in the day, like when we buy tickets, we went in with I guess, an open mind. Like
Okay. Yeah.
it's $12, but like, you know, we get to see a concert. That's cool. And, you know, if the band brought it, we knew it. You know,
Yeah.
oh my God, these songs and they're just on fire, you know. And that's what think let's just, you know, relative to this, think about opening acts back then that didn't really have the hits. They
Yeah.
just had to prove themselves because they had an opportunity to play for 20,000 people.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of times they brought it so hard and you didn't know any of the songs, but you were like, oh my God, who is this again? I'm gonna go buy this album tomorrow. I'm, you know, that's that's how I remember it. People like, you know, being able to be affected by, you know, the moment or the band bringing it. I don't know if
Well, you know, Monsters of Rock 88 was a great example of that because there were two. So the lineup was Kingdom Come,
oh yeah,
Metallica, Dokken, and then it flip-flopped between Scorpions and Van Halen. So the one that I got to see, which was the kickoff, was Scorpions first and then Van Halen. And Van Halen was, you know, okay. They were the headliners, kind of sluggish, you know, but everyone was in a great mood by the end of the time. Metallica kicked ass so much, and this is even after they lost Cliff Burton, right? So this they were playing a few songs off of for and Justice for All, but it was mostly stuff from the first three albums with the new bassist. Jason Newsted. And they, you know, there was like buzz when I went to research this that like Metallica was in some ways upstaging Van Halen. You know, people were going there by the end of the tour to see Metallica. They weren't just like a extra. Kingdom Come, on the other hand, everyone was like, just get these bozos off the stage so we can hear some real metal bands. It didn't work for them at all. It like
no,
backfired because they just didn't. I mean, they were looked at as a Led Zeppelin clone.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah, and people thought of them as kind of a joke, and I don't think they went anywhere after that. You know.
No, I mean, yeah, there was money behind them, but the money didn't even get them.
Mm.
You know, they had the
Like
videos.
record company money, I mean, or
Yeah, I mean, like promotion, you know, they got them in front of audiences. They got them on MTV. They got them, but it didn't pick up. I mean, I think when it came out, it was just those, you know, there was a lot of Zeppelin post Zeppelin bands in that era, but they were
yeah, yeah,
okay. This is obviously their Kashmir. This is obviously their,
yeah.
you know, um, so it was kind of a little more obvious with
I
Kingdom.
mean, another band that was that fits into that would be Great White, you know, but they managed to like get some traction with like Rock Me, which I mean,
Yeah,
very much a Zeppelin sounding kind of tune, right? Um,
kind of, but like
the
you know,
singer and
the singer had
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, Kingdom Come was like you could tell they took blueprints of tunes. You know, I mean, what that first album, Once Bitten, that was a great album, but you know, after that, they kind of.
yeah,
I
you
saw
know,
him on that tour open for Night Ranger. I think it was probably '87, and I mean, the sound was amazing, and they were so tight and on, and it was
mm,
just I was really impressed with them live. You know,
yeah,
um, so you know they did pretty well, and then the next album was a big hit, but it didn't. It's with Once Bitten, Twice Shy. That one is.
yeah.
It became, you know, eh.
Oh, that was kind of a that song. What would you describe it as? It's kind of like a boogie.
Yeah, they were trying to do like rock and roll boogie, like in a metal,
Yeah.
and it was just
And
no, God,
you know who was able to pull that off really, really well? That particular rhythm thing, Motorhead. There's all sorts of Motorhead songs that are essentially boogies. You know, even Kiss too. You know, some of their early stuff is kind of boogie esque, but
oh yeah,
they couldn't pull it off. Great White. You know, it just sounds dated and
yeah, just that, yeah, it wasn't even a good song. But I mean, it was
yeah.
huge. People must have liked it, but I remember like shutting the radio off or turning the station. You know, can't deal with that one.
Yeah. Well, let's take one other comment that Ken said, and then let's talk about some of the ethical questions that we're supposed to be getting to. So Ken says it's interesting to note many of the old school bands are absolutely on fire at the moment. Bands such as Vixen Sax and Uriah Heep is a great
Yeah,
example.
we like that
And
album too, the new
well,
one.
and I got to see him in concert here in Milwaukee with Judas Priest, and they were amazing. They did a 10-song set, and they supported the new album, which is a great album. And they played, I mean, getting to hear like Gypsy and some of the other like super, super heavy stuff where you got the Mick Box on guitar and the keyboard organ stuff at the same time. Bird of Prey, these early songs from the very beginnings of heavy metal, they're playing them. And so yeah, on fire is a good way to put it. It's as if some of these bands have figured out like how to stop smoking, how to stop drinking, how to do the work that needs to be done in order to have a really, really tight and extended performance. And you watch these people and you're like, holy crap, these guys are in their 60s or their 70s. Biff Byford from Saxon is pretty amazing, not just in terms of his vocals, but running around on stage as
Right.
a guy in his late 60s, jumping up on stuff, you're like, how is this guy able to do that? Alice Cooper, who we saw like 10 years ago with Iron Maiden, and he's an older generation. He was out there twirling his baton, jumping around. We're like, how is this guy doing this? And I'm guessing part of it is clean living and
Yes.
dedication to the music itself.
That there has to come a point where you clean up.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have to. I mean, a lot of them that change their lifestyle could still afford to tour. I know Rudy Sarzo's talking about it all
Oh,
the time.
yeah, yeah. He's an interesting one too, because he's played in so many important bands, and he ended up essentially taking over Quiet Riot
Yeah,
as part of Frankie Banali's deathbed wish. And we got to see them here at Summerfest as well. We're really kind of lucky that we have Summerfest in Milwaukee, and they put on an amazing show. Sarzo is still at the top of his game. That day we also saw Lita Ford, and that was a really lackluster show. you know
interesting.
it just kind of felt dated. And they saved, of course, Close My Eyes, and then what was that other big
Kiss Me
hit?
Deadly.
Kiss Me Deadly. Yeah. And you listen to it and you're like, yeah, this is always metal light.
That was, and I'm a big Runaways fan. I love the Runaways,
Yeah,
but like, did she do a lot of that stuff or ignore it?
she didn't do any Runaway stuff, if I remember right. And I think it was maybe like 11 songs total, because these Summerfest things, you're in 2-hour slots, and that 2 hours includes the time to set up and break down for the next
Right.
band. So
Gotcha.
but it just didn't come out. I think you got to have really, in order to be able to like be on fire, first of all, you got to have really great songs that have great composition,
Yeah.
interesting lyrics. And I don't think Lita Ford ever really had that
Right.
effectively. Motley Crue's another great example. They're touring now without Mick Mars, who they've kicked out of the band. They've had all this acrimony where, like, Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee make fun of Vince Neil for not being able to sing. There's accusations that Nikki Sixx is even using backing tracks and stuff like that. And as a bassist, you got to be like, what the hell's that about? I mean, you can't play bass, you know?
Yeah.
So, and Motley Crue is headlining Summerfest this year. And, we're like, you couldn't pay me to go to that show, but they don't have that. They don't have as much to work with as, say, a Judas Priest or an Iron Maiden, or I think even a Saxon does. So
Yeah.
even if they were totally at the top of their game, with, like, say, the classic lineup from 1984, they would be great at that time, but it was never like the kind of greatness that you'd have with some of these other bands. I mean, how do you put them up against like Iron Maiden? you know.
And meanwhile, Mick Mars just put out that album that everybody's raving about.
Yeah. Well, I think he's doing better on his own
Yeah.
without these chuckleheads, you know, who apparently, this is a total different side note. Apparently, they had his name on a whole bunch of businesses that they created without telling him. And then he only found out after they kicked him out of the band, and they're like trying to close these businesses or something like that, and he's like, what the hell is this stuff? So yeah. But he's also an older guy. He's
Yep.
older than all the other members. He was sort of like Ringo Starr with the Beatles.
Right.
You bring in a really seasoned musician to help you out. Mark says, do you think metal musicians, I'd be interested to see your take on this, Scott, as somebody who performs in all these different genres. Do you think metal musicians have different duties to your audience that musicians performing in other genres do, like pop or jazz or classical?
Goes back to, I was thinking about this. Remember earlier on, we were talking about the type of person that is attracted to metal music. And some
Yeah.
of the things was
Yeah.
like kind of the misunderstood loner. A lot of the metalheads kind of like were in the basement, escape, even me escaping into those albums, like the Dio
Yeah.
albums. I think there's a different kind of emotional connection than, let's say, um, like the Kiss FM type pop, right?
Okay.
So, this goes down to, like, we always talk about the relationship you have with your audience, and I think, heavy metal fans, um, the ones that have that emotional connection where the music actually got them through being lonely, or uh,
Yeah.
I think I do, that came up in my mind, like, when we were going through the notes, I'm thinking, well, who's the audience? And I go, well, also somebody that's a self-described metalhead is going to be, a different kind of, will have a different kind of emotional connection than maybe some other genre. And in
You
its own
know, and you could also think about like the show. So if you're a metal musician, and like say take Steve Harris, right? So band leader of Iron Maiden, great, amazing bassist that so many people look up to and have modeled themselves after. He is not above getting up there and putting his arms up and being like, let's get this crowd going, right? I don't think you're going to see a hell of a lot of jazz musicians doing that. I mean, you might see pop stars doing that,
Yeah, pop
but
stars. Yeah, I mean, jazz is a whole different criteria for
yeah,
performance.
yeah,
That it's but like, yeah, you can. I mean, if you're playing big venues, getting the crowd going for any genre, but um, I think a lot of us have an emotional thing with.
you know what though? When it comes to anthemic songs, right? You're now pop will do this, but like we go to a Duran Duran concert, right? People are singing along,
Yeah,
and that's one way you can tell whether a metal concert is really like sticking, whether it's working. People are either singing along to the hits, or they're not. And this is one of the risks with deep cuts. There might not be enough people in the audience to participate. But in metal stuff, in most shows these days, there's going to be some singer putting out the mic and getting people to like sing a verse,
right.
or the chorus on at least one song, right? You're not going to have that in jazz. um
No, I mean, if you're talking like kind of straight ahead,
yeah,
like New York City kind of. No, the audience is there to kind of witness what
it,
happens that
it'd
night.
be rude for the audience to sing along
Well,
in
they
some
couldn't,
respects.
because nobody's going to play the melody so super straight either.
Yeah,
Well, they know it's the melody, but the melody's being interpreted. Um,
yeah.
or a lot of times, you're hearing original compositions for the first time, and
And then there's no way you're singing along.
yeah, it's a different kind of participation. I mean, unless you're talking like a lot of smooth jazz artists will have that um, kind of
Okay.
clap along, or that.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the hip hoppy, kind of light jazz thing. I mean, it has a different kind of show, but also playing for smaller audiences,
Yeah.
unless they're festivals. But
So what do you think about this thing that Mark is asking? Is the audience a spectator or a participant? That's kind of a good criterion. That might help us to divide up fans too. You know, some people might just be going to be spectators. They're like, I just want to be here, you know, listen
I'm
to it.
more of a spectator. Like I'm not waiting to yell along necessarily to all the lyrics sometimes, but um, yeah, I'm there to get into the music, get into the show, get into the moment. But there are people like the end of Heaven Can Wait, right? The whole crowd will chant that.
Yeah, yeah,
You know? Um, but I maybe depend on the person, I guess, as far
yeah,
as a spectator in a good way, like you're having like when I went to Cheap Trick, I was screaming, with my friend, we were screaming along to like a lot of the the old stuff, that was on like the Budokan record, the live Budokan.
yeah,
Um, but if they played something I didn't know, I was all ears,
yeah.
and they're great, and Robin Zander can still sing, so
There are some things where, or some songs rather, I'll say, where having the right kind of crowd, um, you can have this almost like Dionysiac ecstatic moment. I'm thinking about like it's interesting because we got to see Udo and Accept within about 6 months of each other. And it was more or less the full Accept, which had Peter Baltes on bass and Stephen Kaufman just temporarily on guitar. So it was kind of a classic lineup. Obviously, without Udo, it has Mark Tornillo, who's pretty good, but he's not who's Udo,
but no, Udo's
Um,
Udo, man.
yeah, and
Love
Udo.
that guy.
By the way, Udo right now is touring, and Peter Baltes has come over to him, and he's playing bass for him, and his son is playing drums. Not Peter Baltes,
Oh,
but Udo's son. And anyway, when you get to balls to the wall, right, and there's that da 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 da, and everyone's like singing along to that. And then you've got Udo's voice over it, you know. That moment, it like sends chills down your spine, and I think there's a lot of bands that have
yeah.
anthems like that, where the whole crowd is singing the same thing and they all
Yeah.
know it.
Well, what's the Maiden? Everybody sings. There's all those the middle part of the song, "A Fear of the Dark." It's
Oh,
all those
right.
cool
Yeah.
guitar parts. Everybody sings along with the guitar parts, and that's like that's a chills down the spine moment too, because it's such a great song, but the guitar parts are so cool, and they're so
They're,
part of the song that everybody's singing along to it, and
well,
it's
they're
kind of
lyrical
they're
essentially, right?
lyrical. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I always like when they do it and everybody sings right with the guitar parts. It's awesome.
So here's another wrinkle that Mark is bringing up. When musicians perform a song, do they need to stay true to some ideal version of the song, or do they need to adapt it to the circumstances of the show? And, I mean, that's a great question because a lot of times you'd be like, well, I don't want to go and hear them play exactly the way it sounds on the album because then I could just listen to the album at home. You want something different with a live performance, but you want it to be something good. You don't want them to be like rushing through it or sloppy. You want to hear something that makes you say, oh, this was a this is something for us that really made it good. And it's, like you listen to some of Judas Priest's live performances and they're playing the songs faster and you're
Mm.
like, well, what's going on with that? Why are you doing that?
Adrenaline's a hell of a drug,
I suppose, yeah, that could be
Yeah.
it.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, this is a really great question because this is a topic. Um, we always talk about, the effects of technology.
Yeah.
So right now in the guitar world, there's a big debate going on. There's a big, all these digital modeling amps. They're not amps, but they're like, computers.
Right.
And they're paying very prominent musicians a lot of money to use it. And the argument for a lot of it is most people can't tell the difference. It's way more convenient and it just goes
Mm,
direct. And but you know, when they say most people don't know the difference, that's not fair. So if let's take I don't know, you know, like any classic metal. Let's take Richie Blackmore, the
okay.
Marshalls, right? And the
Yeah.
Strat. Let's say then we're going to plug him into a computer and it's going to give a Marshall-like sound.
Yeah.
We would know something was off, especially if you took anybody, we're talking a complete layman, and A B'd it in front of them. So what's happening now is everybody's doing what's called in-ears instead of having monitor wedges.
Okay.
So now the sound is so controlled,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and so everybody's on in-ears, and then you have a little, device where you can like mix your own thing. So there's not really any stage volume. Um, the people that are using the modeling things, it's like this floorboard, um, or whatever, and it plugs directly into the house, so the house controls it. And now the person mixing the live show is essentially mixing an album.
Yeah.
But what happened to the mojo? What happened to the see and hear and get a little feedback or accidental feedback or,
Yeah.
hitting this chord and it, early on that sound of an old Marshall and a G chord like went through my soul and that, but that's not happening these days. You play a G chord and it's a G chord and but it's not. And so, I do these shows now and everybody wants lower stage volumes and I got like for like rock stuff, I got like a smaller 20-watt Marshall head rather than 100-watt, and it's just a smaller one. But even like I did a show last night, and they're like, we got to put like plexiglass around that. We can't have any. And I'm I'm thinking like now it's like it was our direct out there. It's like everybody wants so much control over the sound because of convenience, but
Yeah.
they're trying to make it perfect. But their definition of perfection and ours is different, and that's like the bands that are using tracks now. Like I did a gig, I was hired a gig, and we were playing to tracks, and it's because they wanted it to sound exactly like the recording.
Oh,
And I
interesting.
and
So what is the appeal you think that people, the concert goers have? Um, if you could say, well, I'm getting to see it live. I see some people up on the stage. If I'm close enough to the stage, I can actually like maybe make out what their faces are or something. Or there's the big screens, right? And I guess you could say there's the lights and there's the being in there with other people. But if it's just the same sounding
right.
as the original track, what are you actually getting?
Well, that's the problem. The trend today has gone towards I always talk about diminishing returns in technology. We
Okay, yeah, yeah.
hit a point where okay, people, we're getting diminishing returns on this. Um, and people, I'll put up my rigs and I'll start fights. Why don't you just get a Kemper? Why don't you just get this? It's so much easier. And it's the same thing. Well, I assure you, it's not the same thing. Even though
Yeah.
the Marshall was enclosed, I still had the Marshall with a mic in it. And if I hit that chord on the, my test is this. When I walked out on stage before anything, I'll just hit a G chord and it's like the Marshall tubes and everything. And then people start like kind of cheering because they heard a sound. Now,
Because
if
they're
I'm going,
responding to something. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but I promise you, if I go through uh, a digital system and hit a G chord, it's
Yeah, yeah.
it's fine. But so I think with a lot of metal bands, I mean, Paul Stanley's being accused of singing to tracks.
Well,
Um,
Blackie Lawless was getting a lot of that on the Wasp tour too. You know, that
yeah,
was one of the big complaints that people were having.
I'd rather hear a little pitchiness. I don't
Okay.
mind a little pitchiness. Like, I don't know why this isn't metal at all, but Madonna on at Live Aid, she's pitchy, but the band's on fire and it's live, and
Yeah, yeah.
the imperfections are like so part of that moment. You're there, you're in, but like if I equate it now to the way that we're running sound for rock bands is like what we would consider doing for pit bands to keep them quiet back in theaters for like West Side Story.
So
You know,
here's some great comments on the loudness part. Chris says, if you want to sound like Pete Townsend, you need high stage volume. Rock and roll is uncontrolled in its essence. And then Ken says, call me a stuffy old traditionalist, but the words too loud are not something that should ever be associated with metal, right? And to be a little facetious about it, for those of us who have hearing loss because of having listened to loud shows and stuff like that, maybe we actually do need it loud. But there is also the, like Chris says, the concert experience, feeling the music shake you in your chest, not just the drums, not just the bass, but even maybe the guitar on that
yeah,
part. At the low end of the guitar needs to be something present for you.
rock and roll is as much a sonic experience, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're taking the sonic experience. Now, okay, stage volumes have come down. Fine. I'm still going to use a Marshall amp. I can crank it. You're still going to feel it and hear the tone of it. It's just going to be a little less it's going to be less loud, so it's not
Yeah.
too loud. And I carry the plexi shields around with me because guaranteed, anybody that has played guitar, an amp, a tube amp, when they tell you to turn it down, the more you turn it up, the more you're pushing the tubes, and it gets
Yeah.
warmer,
Yeah.
and it gets into a breakup point. So you find that sweet spot where exactly where you want it. So turning it down is not an option when you find the perfect sound for that room. You have to keep the sound of the room in the equation for better or for worse. Um, it's all part of, you know, I I used to hear live shows over the radio, like live from New York or whatever. It would be like
Yeah.
whoever, like I heard the Kiss one, and you hear everything, the feedback or the B string that went a little flat or something, and these are perfect in the moment. The band still could be on fire, or the singer doesn't make it back to like get the verse and misses the first few words. That's part of it. That's part of
Yeah.
it's part of what happened. And so now I think everything's so controlled, even like it's scary. Well, John Petrucci, I'm sure he was getting paid a lot by Mesa Boogie, but now he's using Fractal, and that's just kind of like, are you serious? Like Dream Theater, just like on in ears, like everything going direct, like playing it like a pit orchestra.
Yeah.
uh you're taking a piece out of it.
Let me ask you one other thing on this point about like then and now and the live performance thing. So as a guitarist,
Mm.
when it comes to songs, hit songs, we'll say, and the guitar solos in them, when you go to the concert, different options are available. One of them is they play the solo exactly the way it is on the album because that's the solo for that song, right? The other option is there could be three. One could be like they self-indulgently noodle over and they do something really weird, and we probably don't want to take that into account. But maybe there's a happy medium where it's not exactly the same solo, but it is recognizable, but there's going to be some stuff in it that's different in this concert from the concert next week. you know I think if you go to see like Uli John Roth, he's such a virtuoso. He's going to do, if he's playing an old Scorpion song, like let's say, you know, if he's playing in trance, very lyrical solos involved in that, he's going to do whatever the hell he wants because that's what he did back in the day. You look at the live performances and they're not all the same, even when that was like the tour for that album in 75, 76. So, I mean, in a way, you don't want to deviate too much, right? Because then it becomes unrecognizable and just becomes self-indulgent. But when you go as a guitarist, like I know what I want to hear as somebody who's not a guitarist. I'm at best an amateur musician, but I'm a big fan. What do you want to hear when you go to see, I don't know, say Iron Maiden and Dave Murray and Adrian Smith are soloing in the Trooper? Do you want to hear them do it note for note, or do you want to hear something slightly different?
I'm gonna back it up a second because you made a really good point. It depends. If
Okay.
if you got somebody that's a true musician, with fantastic ears and can play with intention. Uh,
Yeah.
let's say like anytime I've seen Eric Johnson, he's always improvising, but he's not noodling. You know, he's hearing stuff and playing it kind of in real time. And I love when he goes for it to the point where there's like he'll hit a few bum notes along the way. But then take like Rush. So if I hear Rush do Limelight, I got to hear that solo. That's like an
Okay.
acoustic
Yeah.
solo. But then take Iron Maiden. I would want like if we did the Trooper, um, Adrian Smith could do the solo pretty much, but I would like if he threw a little something in the moment, you know,
Yeah.
like a little note here, a little slide there, kind of like that was unique, but the solo's pretty much still there. And then there's guys like Satriani and Vai who are fantastic, but those are
Mm.
composed solos that they'll play the same every night. So
Yeah.
it depends on, I mean, if it's, you know, it's kind of like Dave Kilminster who plays for Roger Waters. He said the biggest pressure is like he gets put up on this huge wall in front of like, you know, 80,000 people and has to play the Comfortably Numb solo exactly like Gilmore every
Oh,
night. Because he said that's an experience for people. He goes, I have to nail that.
yeah.
And he's like, you know, I'm so terrified I'm gonna like play a wrong note because that's a religious experience for the concert goers.
I don't remember who it was I was reading recently, and they were talking about the challenge of like stepping into somebody else's shoes, their legacy like that. And it was about it was one great guitarist talking about learning somebody else's solos and the difficulty in actually like making it their own, you know.
Well,
Um
that part. Well, you mean making it their own, like getting the audience to accept it?
No, I mean like their style of playing is different enough from the original guitarist, and they want to try to sound like that original guitarist and not, you know, not sound like they're kind of half-assing it or just not fitting in quite as well. It's sort of like the Gilmore thing that you're talking about. The fans don't want to hear whoever it is play something that sounds like themselves. They want to hear something that is part of that particular song.
A
I mean,
great example.
I think you could say that that was probably a big challenge for somebody who I know you've got some strong opinions about, Yannick Gers, when he stepped in for Adrian Smith, right? Can
Yeah.
he actually do Adrian Smith
He didn't.
solos and riffs? Yeah, I
He
mean,
didn't. I mean, he just. I mean, um, to me, Yannick is somebody that people like him because he's a good showman. I'm sure he's a hell of a guy. You know, I'm sure he's sweet, but
yeah,
like I don't think. I think if I sat him down and said, "Put your finger on a note and play Happy Birthday with no mistakes," I don't know if he could do it because you know he just he doesn't play with intention.
precision. Okay.
No intention. It's kind of like his phrases kind of don't make sense, and
Mm,
uh, I. But you know, I don't want to put him down because you know he's in one of the greatest bands in the world. He's doing something right.
yeah,
You know, he's great. You know, in that. But like Adrian Smith, you could sing all of his solos.
yeah.
You know,
I got to say, talking about Judas Priest, Richie Faulkner, you
oh,
know, he nails KK Downing stuff, but he's also recorded new stuff with the band for quite a while, and so he's got his own solos. And I also got to say, Andy Sneap, who doesn't have quite the same status with the band. He's a guitar tech and I think a producer, and he steps in for Glenn Tipton because Glenn Tipton can't tour anymore.
right.
He nails it. Those two young guys, you see them on stage and you're like, this is amazing. And you still got, you know, old Ian Hill on the back plowing away, and he does a great job as Judas Priest bassist. And of course you've got, you know, the drummer Scott Travis now Judas Priest has never been like super dependent on a drummer. They've always it's sort of like Spinal Tap, where they've gone through a million of them, or AC/DC has gone through a million drummers too. And then you've got Rob Halford, and of course nobody could possibly replace Rob Halford, and he's still going along well. But those two young guys have totally revitalized the sound of the band in concert, you know, and
Although
they bring such energy to the stage.
a killer example of what you're talking about too is when Reb Beach from Winger joined Dokken. And
Oh,
Reb Beach has his own sound. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
completely unique. Um, his time's different from anybody's I've heard. His phrasing. I mean, he's a ridiculously great musician. So I remember when they put that album Erase the Slate out with Reb, and then they put out a live DVD, and I bought it immediately because I needed to see what Reb Beach is going to do with all the classic songs. He learned the solos. I mean, they were pretty much there. And I was surprised that, like, he kept them pretty close, but, there's definitely Reb Beach in there. Like, there's
Okay.
definitely, for somebody that's a guitar hero in his own right, to stick to the solos like that, I thought was respectful and kind of like, you know, George Lynch was one of the greats from the era too, and they, they definitely deserve to be part of the song. I'm kind of glad Reb didn't just do his thing, although Reb would have played amazing solos on the tunes.
Yeah, yeah.
He learned them mostly note for note with some other of his things in there, but like that's one somebody should check out, where it's like somebody stepping in that's very unique, known for their thing, but then they're stepping in for another legend to, like, I think it's
Yeah.
live. It's probably on YouTube. You could put like Red Beach and Dawkin.
Another thing that is kind of along these lines in terms of singers, that I was reflecting on recently, and then let's talk about the ethical stuff quick, and also address Chris's comment about KK's Priest. So, Paul Di'Anno, original singer of Iron Maiden, and then he's replaced by a much better singer, greater range, more power, greater showman in Bruce Dickinson. So there's certain songs where Paul Di'Anno sang them originally, and Bruce Dickinson takes them over, and they're just amazing. Phantom of the Opera, Wrathchild. But then there's others where, in a way, they were just the right song for somebody like Paul Di'Anno and his range and his ability. And when Bruce Dickinson sings it, it's like overpowered in a way. It's like he's got too much range and it doesn't sound right. And I listened to Sanctuary the other
Mm.
day, where it's being sung. I think it might have been off of a live performance by Bruce Dickinson. And you're like, well, this is the song and it's Bruce Dickinson, so of course it's great. But he's in effect like doing vocal noodling in all the different spots because he can. And it didn't ruin it for me, but I was like, I actually prefer Paul Di'Anno on this one. I want somebody who's a little bit more limited and can stick right to what the song ought to be.
Diano, yeah. I mean, Diano was the kind of the punk side of,
Yeah.
and it's something interesting. Um, the first drummer, why am I forgetting his name?
Oh, Clive Burr.
Clive Burr.
Yeah.
If they, so I really like his drumming a lot
Yeah,
more.
me too.
I don't know if you saw the clip going around, because Nico's time's never been great. I mean, if you listen to Live After Death, he's kind of all over the place even back then. But there's a clip going around where they're doing Wasted Years, and somebody's like recording Adrian, and they finish the chorus, and they're going into the middle section before the solo, and he starts doing that thing, and he kind of looks back, and the tempo had dropped, and then he leaves the string open and looks back and goes like this, does this, and then he starts playing the riff again, and then he stops and does this and walks.
Oh, wow.
So there's a clip of there, like, where, like, he had it with, I don't know if Nico's really struggling this tour more than normal, but It's
That's
just
interesting.
for him to have had it on, on stage in the middle of the show. It was a really good, it was a really interesting clip to see. Um, for him just to be like, are you going to pick a tempo? But it's funny because Steve Harris is like a rock on that boom,
Oh
boom,
yeah.
boom. It's like, just listen to the bass.
Oh,
Oh,
Ken says Nico had a semi-stroke.
he
Still isn't
did?
back at his best. That's interesting. Yeah.
Do you
You
think if
know,
he knew that, like
that is that is a good point though. If you have somebody like Steve Harris, you could probably put anyone in and Steve Harris would just, if they're off, you just listen to the
you
basses,
just listen to the
you know?
bass? So,
And go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say, now that Ken, thank you, because now I'm kind of like, why
Now you
would
feel bad for saying that.
well, no, I don't feel bad for saying that. I wonder why then Adrian Smith would be frustrated knowing that.
Well, people can have all sorts of
Yeah.
reactions, right? Well, so Chris says KK's priest is awesome. Need comments. KK's priest equals KK is priest. I think they're like, it's sort of like Udo with accept,
Hmm.
except that KK, we talked about this a while back. He seems to be driven in large part, in his autobiography and the comments that he made by something like resentment against his bandmates. And I've listened to Sermons of the Singer. I think it's a great album. And it would be fun to hear KK's lineup of priests playing old priest songs. But I think, it's hard to put that up against the full band of priest myself. What do you think, Scott?
Oh, I I think they're both great. You know, we had
Yeah,
talked about, this, I think on the last show we
it was a
did.
couple shows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But KK, yeah.
I mean, I think we can distinguish
Right.
between like the personality part, which definitely seems to have some problems, and the musical part in this case. You know,
Hmm.
I think it is interesting that when KK put his priests together, he recruited people who had been in Priest before, like Les Binks was the drummer. He's not anymore. And then he had Tim Ripper Owens singing.
Yep. Which is pretty
So
cool,
yeah, yeah. He
So it's
brought
not
in some other people too, and I don't remember exactly who, but it was kind of like putting together almost like a super group in some ways.
which is clever because, it is rooted in Priest in some way, even it's not the original it's not like some people you picked up in LA kind of thing, where I
Well,
mean, which a lot of
that
people do.
yeah, that would be Stephen Percy with Rat, right? He brings in these young guys and like, who the hell are these guys? What connection did they have to Rat? When Warren DeMartini was in it, you could be like, or not Warren, Carlos Cavazo was there with Warren DeMartini. You could be like, okay, not original, but he did play with them on a lot of stuff, and he's from like the same scene, and he's the
Yeah.
right age, and it worked with having him.
I thought
Um,
it really worked. Yeah, I liked it.
yeah,
I thought it
yeah.
was a good choice,
Oh yeah, yeah.
So,
We got to see them live, and it was pretty amazing. That was probably the last time that you could get to see Rat in an authentic way, and that would have been 2018, maybe. Sound
and
about right?
yeah, and let me ask everybody this question. Um, when people from our era, like Stephen Piercy, do pick up like 21-year-olds now who were born way after,
Yeah.
is there any, do we find it hard to believe because these people didn't live through the era, or they don't have any idea about the era, they didn't live in a time without internet, cell phones? It's kind of like sometimes I find it hard for some of these like young LA people to play with
Hmm.
these who we would call legends. I think it's
Yeah,
fine,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Um, do we as fans kind of go, hold on a second, you know? I think I might have that prejudice a little bit where um, you don't understand that music, you know.
I think it kind of depends. I mean, One exception to that would be when we did see Udo, and so this would have been back before 2015 because we saw him at the Chance in Poughkeepsie. So we're still living out there. It was Udo who was in his 60s, surrounded by all these young guys, same lineup with two guitarists, bassist, a drummer, and then Udo on vocals. And it was interesting because you could tell these young guys were all like totally honored to be there with Udo. They
Okay.
knew the band was tight. They were doing the vocals right. And they were all having a great time, right? There was no like resentment. Like, when we saw Accept 6 months later down in New York City, you could tell that like Stephen Kaufman was not happy because Wolf Hoffman was treating him like crap on stage, like disrespecting him on stage, quite
Oh.
visibly. So Ken says, depends on the vibe within a band. Rob Halford obviously gets on well with and likes Richie Faulkner, and the current Priest lineup appear to have gelled very well.
But Richie's not in his 20s. He's like in his 40s, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he's
Although
like,
I mean, he's a different generation. That's very clear. But yeah, Richie Faulkner's old enough to have had heart trouble, which interrupted them for a little while,
yeah, I
right?
mean, like, so an example, the Jeff Tate show. So I ended up going to the show because one of my former students is one of his guitarists, and he's 24, 25 now. And I kept, he texted me, I said, "You're kidding me. Like, I'm completely can't believe." And then I get there, and he's not really, I mean, he likes it, but he's like, he never really knew who Queensryche was. He,
Hmm.
and it was all younger people, and they were good. Like, they were good, they looked cool, but something about it was just kind of like, I had the feeling that they didn't realize the magnitude of who they were playing with. You know,
That's interesting to and I wonder if we could turn this to like, audiences, because we do have, what do you owe your audience? I think we could probably have the experience of like seeing somebody play and then there's people in the crowd and they're like, who are these people? And you're like, how the hell do you not know who these people are, But it's understandable because they belong to a different generation, and bands need to do stuff to ensure that intergenerationally they are still going to like be reaching out to people, and their people are going to be listening to their music, and maybe part of that is the band's responsibility and part of it is the fans' responsibility. But it also is kind of contingent on, well, what are younger people in their teens, 20s, maybe we could say even 30s, are going to respond to and want to hear, Um,
yeah, in Jeff Tate's case, his audiences are pretty much going to be people like us
I think so, yeah.
around our age. So, I mean, I think it's a good story that you said that you could tell Udo's band, although they're young, they knew the magnitude of the music they were playing, and who the legend was. And,
Yeah.
with Jeff, I mean, the band was good. They were great. But something about it was just kind of like, you know, hinging on this as a job. Not like
Okay.
not like it was a drag, but like, oh cool, I got a gig.
Well, in a way, they're not a band as like a unit then, right? So like what Ken was saying, Rob Halford and Richie Faulkner, and Richie Faulkner's getting along not just with Rob Halford, but Ian Hill. They
Sure.
are the like the two rocks of the thing. Um, and oftentimes Ian Hill in interviews is the one who will actually like say, no, here's the band's official position, because he gets to,
Right.
they're definitely a unit. The whole thing, the drummer, Andy Sneed when he's playing as well. But we're running close to the end. We should talk about some of these questions. And I think, we can talk about all sorts of obligations. Do the bands have an obligation to introduce audiences to the newer stuff? What would the basis for that be? What should they be playing? Do they have duties to songs to keep playing them? maybe they have different obligations to the different kinds of fans. And so what we can talk about is reconciling these competing goods, because it is a good thing to play the hits that everybody likes, right? It's not a bad thing. You're not selling out by playing We're Not Going to Take It as Twisted Sister. You're allowing people to participate in this communal experience of hearing a song that they probably heard, in the 1980s, or maybe they discovered it in the 2000s because they're younger, and they've seen the video, which is kind of cheesy, but they respond to it. And then the deep cuts, the ability to get to hear something played by that band that you wouldn't ordinarily hear, that the band is kind of curating, that's a good, right? And playing the new music, that's a good, introducing them to something original, something that they haven't heard before. And so how do we reconcile this? And myself, I like this idea that you were articulating and some other people articulated, that different venues call for different kinds of responses. If you're touring on your tour for the new album, you better play something for that new album. And it better not just be one song. It better be 3 or 4 songs in your set list. If you are at a music festival, maybe it's okay just to play the hits, because you're appealing to different kinds of fans. If it's like an exclusive thing where, maybe you were just meeting with super fans, I think then you better be playing a whole mix. There better be some new stuff there, and it better be the best stuff off the new album. You better be playing the hits that everybody's going to respond to, and you better be playing some deep cuts, and then you'll be, pleasantly surprised how many people are singing along to it. But each of these audiences does deserve something. Even the people that are, like, you call them window shoppers, I think you still owe them something, right? Just not as much as you owe the smaller proportion of the super fans. And so maybe we weight it, right? You think, and how could you estimate this? It's not like you can look out in the crowd and be like, aha, I see 15% super fans, 30%
Right.
this. Or you can't do that, right? And you're not going to like change up the set list. Okay, well, here we go. We're gonna put this one in here. The set lists are kind of set in advance, right? But I think this balancing it, I think there's an ethical obligation to do that.
Well, first of all, I think, well, if you take Bon Jovi, John would call sets before. They'd be always different. And
Oh,
before they
interesting.
go on stage, he would change the opening song because the band
Wow.
knew their catalog.
Okay.
They were well rehearsed. There's something to throw in here. It is I'm going to answer it with a question to start. Because a band's successful, are they allowed to grow and change?
Yeah, that's important.
Blackmore's Night. There's a perfect example.
Well,
Richie,
that is a radical departure.
right.
Yeah.
And so the answer with Richie is yes. It's what he wanted to do. And
Yeah.
but U2 did it in a big way. Now, I didn't like when they changed when the pop, whatever it is, those records, but
Yeah. Octung Baby and
right.
One and stuff
I,
like that. Yeah.
I wasn't into that stuff at all, but I remember thinking, well, we
I
don't need.
think in that case, part of the problem is that they went against their own ethos, because prior to that, they had been a very political band, right? And so, you think about like Sunday Bloody
Oh
Sunday,
yeah,
even into the Joshua Tree, there's like Bullet in the Blue Sky, which, so Red Hill Mining Town, there's this whole sense of like, we're a band that's there for the ordinary person. We're going to speak up for them. And then you get this weird postmodern, we're all basically pop stars kind of stuff. And, when Duran Duran does that, it's okay, because they
yeah,
never pretended to be anything other than that.
right,
When U2 does that, you're like, what the hell are you doing?
right, right. Yeah, I mean, so
It's sort of like the thing with like Brian Robertson with Motorhead, where he comes out on stage and he's not wearing what the band is wearing. He's wearing like biker shorts and ballet slippers, and people are like, who the hell is this guy?
yeah, I mean, I think I think the answer is not. Let's just well, I'm going to put it out there. and I hate to always pick on them because I'm a fan.
Okay.
Def Leppard, the 1988 set is still their set,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they put out a lot of albums since then.
Yeah.
Um, and that's you're just appealing to the window shoppers only, and if you think about it, they radically changed. Like I was a big High and Dry fan, and even Pyromania, but once
Yep.
Hysteria came out, it took me a long time to even acknowledge that that was Def Leppard.
Yeah. I know that's when I basically quit listening to them myself, and you can hear the when you go back to it and listen to Hysteria and how things are mixed, you can, or not Hysteria, Pyromania, you can hear where Hysteria came from, but it's not that far along, and
Yeah, I mean, and then but that's when Phil Collin joined the band. He wasn't really on. He was on like
yeah, yeah,
one solo on Pyromania, and so he was part of the new sound. And then Steve Clark passed away, so
yeah.
you know the sound totally changed. But um, the fact that they have such a big catalog and we have to hear all of Hysteria
Oh,
is kind of like, oh yeah,
here's a if a band has this is from Chris. If a band has residency in Vegas, can they play deep cuts? I don't know.
you know,
I bet they're like contractually bound in some ways,
I
right?
I gotta admit I don't know how that works because you figure, I mean, are they gonna play the same show every night?
I imagine they probably do. If you're if you're in a venue like that, you know, where it's a lot of people who are just as you mentioned, like in casinos, people just kind of wander in, right?
Well, they probably play in the
Um,
theater where you have to pay to go see them, right?
that's true, yeah.
Like,
So it's not just an opportunity crowd, in other
no,
words.
like I've done those gigs and like that's where I saw like bands like Night Ranger. They're playing kind of in the middle of the casino.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I don't know how the Vegas thing works, but I was kind of surprised, and then I was, that Sting was doing it.
Yeah.
This kind of little heartbreaking. I mean, financially, it was probably really rewarding.
That's it. You could and we could actually even say maybe like from a utilitarian perspective, if an artist is still producing stuff, maybe they take these kind of gigs where they're not gonna, it's just gonna be like, okay, I'm gonna give the people what they want, which then allows them to do the quirkier, for the real fans kind of stuff. I think I could say that would be okay. If they're just doing that, they're like, man, I'm just here for the paycheck.
Right.
That's a whole different ball
That's a
game,
whole
right?
different that's we're taking artistry out of it then.
Yeah.
We're taking the
Or like, let's say a band was going to say, we've been playing these songs so long. I don't remember any of the other songs that we used to do. We're just going to stick with an easy set list because, man, I'm like 67 years old
right.
and I don't want to learn any. I don't want to learn any new stuff, new relatively, meaning new, older stuff. I think, you could understand that, but that would be very disappointing.
Oh yeah, that's what I mean. Like when Dee Snyder says, the when he's kind of all the words he uses to attack Metallica, I would use
Yeah.
to describe a band that's kept the same set list. That's a
Okay.
cash grab. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's lazy.
Self-indulgent. Yeah.
Self-indulgent. Yeah, it's completely lazy. And it's, to a degree it's kind of like, and now you feel like you're just acting,
Yeah. Yeah.
we go see a band. It's like, are you really excited to play that song your millionth time since 1982? Or,
Yeah,
um,
that makes a lot of sense.
and
Yeah.
you're not. These people aren't 22 anymore. It's kind of like Robert Plant. Everybody gets mad at him, but he can't. He's not like a 21-year-old, a 25-year-old kid, whatever. In the early 70s, it was a different era at a different age,
Yeah.
and he's doing music now that reflects him, which I think is amazing. And Miles Davis used to, like when he kept changing, people were like, well, why don't you play My Funny Valentine anymore? And he's like, well, that's what records are for,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? And so, I mean, there are so many people yelling at Robert Plant, but like, let's face it, he's not going to sing Zeppelin.
In his case, there's a interesting wrinkle though as well, which is that he says that. the Led Zeppelin stuff was a very dark time for him, and he doesn't want to go back to that sort of thing because it's emotionally difficult for him to do. So when he does do any, like actually Andy and her brother saw Led Zeppelin or Robert Plant years and years ago, and she said that he did in fact play some Led Zeppelin songs. And one of the things, this is very subjective, of course, she said there was like a darkness that descended over, not as if the lights went down or something, but there
Right.
was something about it where his whole demeanor changed, and he doesn't want to do that anymore.
Plus,
So
yeah, he doesn't have the range. He doesn't have the ability to sing that stuff.
yeah, I mean, even Dio towards the end was having to like lower the key of songs. You could hear it in some of the live performances. It's amazing when somebody still has the vocal chops. I mean, and we probably need to wrap up. And I'm hearing
Yeah.
my neighbor playing the sax next door. I don't know if anyone can hear that. It's almost like our sending off music.
Yeah.
Seeing Judas Priest and Rob Halford getting out there on the stage singing Painkiller, which is an incredibly, so vocally it's an athletic song. It demands an incredible amount from the people, and you could see it in the way that he was taking his stances so that he could actually like hit these notes. And so I asked Kat about it because Kat is a professional vocalist, and I was like, what's going on with standing like this and doing that? And she's like, well, that's so he can open up his range. That's so he can sustain. And the fact that in his late 60s he can still belt out a song like Painkiller is just amazing, whereas you see other artists and they can't even stay on tune.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, didn't take care of themselves along the way, or didn't figure it out, or burnt out, or sang wrong, or whatever it is.
Could also just be bad genetics.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And we did have some great artists who came close to like losing it all together. You think about Klaus Meine and Ian Gillan, both of them had to have operations on their vocal cords, and there was a chance that they'd never be able to sing again. And I mean, fortunately, they're both still out there belting away. So, but we should wrap this up. Thanks to everybody for being here and contributing. And Scott, it's great to have another conversation with you about this sort of stuff. Ken, who is here today, we're going to do an interview ideally sometime down the line in one of these and talk about the new wave of British heavy metal and get Ken on here and reminisce about stuff. Hopefully it won't just be a trip down memory lane, but we'll have some philosophical content. So any last words, Scott, to take us out?
No, this is a great discussion, and hopefully this video gets seen by a lot of people, because it's kind of a discussion that people that don't think about it might want to chime in on, after the fact.